So Moana, well, the live-action remake of Moana is a very pointless remake. And I know a lot of people have that same thought in their head whenever we see, the abundance of these Disney films that adapt their classic animated films into live-action productions. But I think the way that I've kind of been looking at these movies thus far has kind of been like cover songs, and that association is much easier to make with the musical Moana, evoking all the familiar earworms that made the original so catchy and compelling. But for being remade a mere 10 years after the original, there's a refusal to stray from the script or add in any new songs. It is indeed the greatest hits that might provide some familiar comfort, but the dedication to preserving this text as is makes one question what point there was in spending $250 million to tell the exact same story the exact same way again. Now, the story remains unchanged, forcing one to focus more on the production than on being engrossed in this familiar tale. Catherine Laga'aia steps well into the role of Moana, aiming to explore the ocean to save her tribe threatened by a curse from the gods. And I was hoping to see more of her plucky and eccentric nature, but Catherine's performance is played up a bit too straightforward, with more attention paid to how well she hits the high notes in her music than anything else. She does okay for her role in a movie that is so engrossed with staged musical numbers and visual effects that it leaves her little room to define her character as anything more than, what was laid out in the previous film. Moana's quest will soon lead to her teaming up with the demi-god Maui, reprised by Dwayne Johnson with a buff body, CG animated tattoos, and long hair. And much like Catherine, Johnson also doesn't stray too far from the role that he once played, highlighting the restraints of his performance more tongue-in-cheek with comedic lines than bursting with loud charm. Consider the brief joke of Maui grabbing the odd-looking chicken Hey and declaring him a boat snack, that line. The animated film presents this as a quick gag with a zippy move and a high-pitched voice from Johnson. The movie poses the same moment with a drier delivery that is decently funny, but it still does little to persuade comparisons to the superior source material. The only spark of something new within this interpretation comes through in the visuals. Maui's iconic song, You're Welcome, features clever visual effects, including spinning illustrations, moving sand sculptures, and light manipulation. The coconut critters, known as the Kakamora, have a little bit of a different look compared to the animated film, given their furry exteriors have much better movement this time around. Little bursts of these visual revisions, it did give me some hope for something a little more exciting over the horizon, and sadly, those hopes were dashed with the arrival of the coconut crab of Tamatoa, never straying far from the character that Jermaine Clement brought to life and voiced, which he does once more in this movie. The design is kept relatively faithful to retain his gags about being too big and demanding that Moana pick one of his eye stalks to look at when making eye contact. His song about being shiny is still amusing, even if Jermaine doesn't add in anything new here. His final line, oh, did you like the song? It is present, with the only addition being any notes, so not a whole lot added here. Visually, the film looks beautiful, and cinematographer Oscar Fora certainly doesn't skimp on the gorgeous green islands and spectacular sights of stars across the ocean. It's disappointing, though, that director Thomas Kail, known for the Hamilton musical, doesn't have the same spark to make this movie more of his own. He treads safely by maintaining Jared Bush's original screenplay as though it were an immortal work of Shakespeare that dare not be sullied by rewording a single line. One dare not find a funnier way to modify Maui's criticism of Moana having the typical hallmarks of a Disney princess. If it works, and Kail settles for merely performing Disney's greatest hits rather than adding any new material here. And that might be reassuring for audiences who have grown aggravated by Disney's perpetual revisions of its animated library, but the refusal to try anything new only makes the pointless nature of these remakes all the more apparent. The Moana remake wastes all of its lush staging on a movie that adds nothing new and refuses to explore as much as its titular hero. The film shares too much DNA with the How to Train Your Dragon live-action remake. It has the same traits, targeting an animated film less than 20 years old, refusing to change anything in the script, and tossing one of the original voice actors in front of the camera. And just like How to Train Your Dragon, I found myself bored by the recitations that treat a fairly recent Disney film as though it were a classic that can't be tampered with. If the argument against past Disney remakes was, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, the argument for this movie could be, if it ain't broke, don't order a duplicate. So yeah, I wish I could like this movie more, because I do think it does have some good production quality here, and the music is still pretty fun, but the fact that the script is very much verbatim the same, you can't help but compare it to the original, and there's always that reminder that I would much rather be watching the original animated film than this live-action film that looks good but doesn't add anything new. I feel like I'm seeing the same story over again with nothing new present. And for some people, I think, they might like the movie to that degree, that it's just, it's a faithful adaptation. It doesn't attempt anything new. It doesn't rewrite anything. It doesn't add any new songs. But if you don't add anything, there's no point. It's literally the exact same story told in live action. And you're forced, that question comes up more and more. Why did I need this film? What is the point? It adds nothing more here other than the fact that, Disney, you throw $250 million at the same script for an animated movie. Yeah, you can make it in live action. I know Disney can do that. They've done it many times. But if they're not going to try anything new, then there really isn't a point to this new version of Moana. So yeah, I really didn't like this remake of Moana.